This evening, we're going to be talking about the riveting topic of preparing your data for offline use in the runtime. So we've got lots of things to cover this evening. So let's see if we can make it through some of them. So there's a number of different ways that you can take your data offline for use in runtime applications and inside of the apps that we have that are built on top of the runtime. And really it starts off with enabling your layers for offline use. So we're going to start with a series of demos that's going to kind of quickly run through how we enable a bunch of different layer types for offline use with runtime applications. So let's get out of slides and switch right over to some demos. Maybe. Uh-oh. All right, off to a good start so far. Yay, we can see Pro. Okay, so we're going to switch over into ArcGIS Pro. And here I have a base map that I've authored. This was authored with local data that I had on my machine. That's all vector data that's living inside of a file geodatabase. And it has some very nice cartography done by somebody else, not made by me, because it would not look this nice if I did it. And as we see, we can zoom in. We have kind of layer level symbology turned on. We have additional layers turned on. We see more detailed roads come in. And we want to publish this map as a vector-based map to be able to be used inside of our other maps. So to do that, in Pro, from the Sharing tab, we want to share as a web layer. From there, we're going to get a share as experience that allows us to make a couple of choices. First, we know we want to share it as a vector tile layer. And once we select vector tiles, we can come over and we can configure how much detail, the type of tiling scheme that we want to use, but most importantly for offline use, at the very bottom of the screen, there is an allow clients to export a tile cache. So this is what you need to be able to do to be able to then consume this service in something like the export tile cache task inside of the runtime APIs, or to use this in additional maps that go offline as well. Now, let's say instead of just being vector-based data, we also had a hillshade in here, or we had some imagery, and instead of being able to use a vector tile layer, we needed to be able to publish this as raster tiles. And it's the exact same process. We select tiles on the configuration page. We then allow clients to export these tiles. And then we also have, both on the vector tiles and with raster tiles, the number of tile that you're allowed to take offline with this. Now, based on a tiling scheme with raster tiles, it's a fairly rigid and defined amount of space. And it grows with a well-defined area of, you start off with one tile, then there's 4 tiles above it, and the number goes up, and it can be quite consistent. With vector tiles, the way that it's indexed and the way that the tiles are created is a little bit different. So there's some experimentation needed to find the right number to be able to limit what you want to take offline. And this is really about limiting how much load you're putting on your back-end services. For us, the default that we have for both of these is the 100,000 limit. So that's great. So this is the way you can actually make some tiled services to use in maps. But what about our featured data? With our featured data, there's a couple of different ways to be able to enable it. One, we can switch over and let's take a look at if we were using an enterprise geodatabase. So here I have the catalog view of my enterprise geodatabase. If we zoom in here, we can see that I have a single feature a single feature class created here. To be able to enable this for synchronization capability, we go to our Manage tab, and we need to make sure that it has global IDs. So we add our global IDs, and then from there, I know I want to also collect photo attachments when this is out in the field. So I'm going to add our attachments with it by using create attachments. And you can see that adds in the attachment table as well as in a relationship class to link them together. And then finally, once I have both of those things done, I need to enable archiving on that feature class. What enable archiving does is it makes the geodatabase keep track of the changes that are happening so that when we go to do synchronization, we know just what pieces of data have changed and what we need to be able to send between the client and the server to minimize the size of the deltas that we're sending. So once we've authored this service, we can then consume it inside of our maps, or we can consume it directly inside of runtime applications to be able to take offline. So another way that we can make feature services for offline use is with the ArcGIS developer site. And it's a great way to actually make some feature services very quickly for testing. On the developer site, there's a plus button, and it allows you to add a new layer. And from that, we could either drop files, if we had, say, a CSV file or some GeoJSON that we wanted to turn into a feature service, or we can actually start from scratch and start to specify the whole schema of a service. So put in our service title, add our mandatory tags. We can choose what kind of geometries we want to collect, the spatial reference that we're going to collect in. And now, as of a couple of updates ago, we have a much more full-featured experience in terms of being able to actually define fields, define if they're required or not, and actually set up if they're coded value or range domains. But right now, we're just going to put a single field in and then move on to the settings page, which is what the more interesting part is for enabling for offline. And it's as simple as finding under the settings the enable synchronization flag. So now when we create this service, we'll get a service that's enabled for offline use. So what if you already have an existing service inside of your content? So here I have an invasive pests feature service that I've previously created, and I want to be able to take this offline. So from the items page of the service, I can go into settings, and we'll see the exact same checkbox that we saw when we created our new one with the developer site. Once we've enabled that, we can now consume that inside of our map. So once that's completed, we can go back to our content. And we can start to author maps using all of the services that we put together. So here, I'll have a map that's very simply a map of a certain area. I've happened to have made a couple of bookmarks for that map for different areas that we want to work offline for. I've added the service that we've enabled for offline use, and I could have as many different layers in here that were capable of going offline. I could have our vector tile service that has export in there. It could be based off of a raster tile base map. That was our base map. So any layer that can be enabled for offline use can be included in this map. Once our map is authored, we can then go back to the detail page for this map, and we can look at some of the settings for offline use. So the first thing that we'll notice is the map is enabled for offline use, which is a really good start. We also have a number of options to be able to control what data is either sent to the clients or retrieved from the clients when synchronization happens. So this allows you, if you had something like an inspection workflow where you wanted to send a whole bunch of people out into the field to collect data, and they're working relatively independently of each other, say. So they actually, you can set this up to just send down only the schema of the database so that when people collect, they don't have everybody else's data. And you set it up so they would just get the schema, collect their own data, and then only push their data up to the service, and then never pull down data from anybody else. So it's another way to keep the deltas of data very, well, smaller when you have large number of field workers out there. You also get some options of, if you're working with read-only data, what attachments and how you want to be able to move them back and forth with the client and the server. One of the new things that's embedded in that we saw in the plenary this morning is the ability to create offline areas. So this is important for what we refer to as the pre-planned offline workflows that we have, where somebody's previously gone through, has designated specific areas that we want to go offline, and we let the server package them all up for us. So from a UI, I can go and I can create a new box on the map. If I wanted to have it updated on a regular scheduled interval, I could configure that here. I'm going to say none for this one. I just want a one-time creation of it. I can specify the level of detail that my field workers will be working at, and then I can create a map area. So what's happening as I've created this map area is it's going out, it's packaging up the base map, and all the other layers that we referred to in that map. And it stages them as items in ArcGIS Online that are related to that map. So now when you create a runtime-based application, you can leverage the pre-planned offline task workflows to be able to retrieve a list of those different areas, show them to your users, and then once they select the one that you want, you can take them offline. Another way to do this, it's great we have a UI for it, but sometimes, let's say you have a whole bunch of areas that you want to go offline with, and this is where the Python API comes in to really help make this easier. So this is just a small bit of Python that goes through. It opens up the map that we just created, and then for all of those bookmarks that we saw that we had in our map, it creates a set of item properties for us, including a nice little snippet, a title for that area, and then it calls create on the offline areas, telling what bookmark name to use, the item properties, where we want to store it, and then the scales that we're going to be working at for that map. So this is going to iterate through the 5 different bookmarks that I had, and it's going to create 5 different offline areas for those, and all of the packaging will be kicked off and run on the server. So when you had a field user that would say, open up that map, you could have an experience built where they would get those areas, you would choose them and download them, and then could be able to either synchronize them to get the latest updates or continue working. The offline area thing does work in enterprise, yes. Yes, it does. All right, so this is one way to be able to package up data inside of ArcGIS Online for use in your offline apps. With a map that's been authored for offline capabilities, there's also our on-demand workflows as well, which enable to use the offline map tasks inside of the Runtime APIs to be able to, on-demand, cache them, bring them down to the client, and then do synchronization, either one-way or two-way synchronization with that. So next, we're going to take a look at back inside of ArcGIS Pro. So we've talked a little bit about how you can get your feature data offline, as well as how you can get your raster and vector tiles offline in a services-based pattern. But there's some other types of data that we don't support going offline with a services-based pattern, and that's namely the transportation networks and your locators. To be able to create those, they can be made inside of ArcGIS Pro or ArcGIS Desktop and packaged into a mobile map package. So we'll start here with a map that I have. It leverages the base map that we looked at earlier, so it's all made from local data. But on top of that, it adds a bunch of well data that I have as well. So I would like to take all of this data along with the routing network that I've included in this map. So you can see I have a reference to a network data set and a locator that I've created and packaged this up to use offline. One of the other things that I've been able to do here is I've also been able to specify some symbology from Pro that I can't do in the web that then will carry through into your runtime applications as well. So once I have my data authored, my layers are all set up, I can use, again, on the Share As tab, the Share As a mobile map package. From there, we can either package and upload to ArcGIS Online, so it stages an item in online, or we can save the file to disk as an MMPK. Once you create your mandatory summary tags, we can choose if we want to use an area of interest from one of our layers, or if we're going to use the current display extent that we have. And we can choose to include a locator that I've previously added to the project. So on the catalog view, we can see that I have my locator added here, and then back in our packaging experience, we'll get that locator in a task, and for some reason, it chose to stay grayed out. So that's great. It's the only time it's worked that way. Let's try it one more time and see what happens. There we go. So we can now hit package. So what this is doing, again, it's taking all of that data that we had locally on our device, and it's creating some mobile geodatabases that allow all of the feature layers to go into. It's creating vector tiles for any of the data that it might be able to store as vector tiles, and creating raster tiles. All of that data gets packaged into a mobile map package along with the locators that are enabled for runtime use. And then you can take that MMPK and use it with the mobile map package class inside of the runtime APIs to be able to interrogate what maps are in it, what network data sets are in it, and what locators are there, and then build those into your application. So one thing to note is when you do create mobile map packages from ArcGIS Pro, they're read-only. So if you're doing editable data, you need to follow the services pattern to be able to have data that you can edit on the client side. So switching back over to the slides. So we talked about maps, talked about how we can use web maps to create offline areas, our mobile map packages. Now, this is great. We've talked about how you can enable all of this data for use, but we actually didn't look at any usage of it whatsoever. And that's perfect because we have 2 more sessions coming up this week that will go into all of those details. So Wednesday, tomorrow afternoon from 4 till 5 p.m., we're going to cover how you take your data that you've taken offline and use that in an editing application. And then on Thursday morning, we have the Working with Maps Online and Offline, which will cover how you take those mobile map packages and those offline areas that you have, and then actually consume those with the runtime objects to build applications on top of that. So with that, please rate the session. It's all done inside of our app this year, and have time for questions if anybody has them. Yes, back there. So the question was, on the developer site, when you're creating a feature layer, are there a limit to the number of features that you can have that's in the layer after you've created it? When you drag and drop. So if you had a CSV file that you were dropping into it, I think there actually is. I don't know that number off the top of my head, but I do believe that there is a size limit to the CSV file, how big those files can be when they're loaded up there. We can look afterwards and see if that's documented, but I do think there's a size limit on the file. Yeah. Yeah, that is definitely, some attachment sizes are limited to 10, but I'm not sure if that carries over to that one or not. But yeah, thank you. So, any other questions? Yes. No. So the question was, does the mobile map package work with a geometric network? No. Right now, the mobile map package and what we looked at with including a network data set is just about transportation networks for routing. Yeah. There's additional work that's happening throughout the platform with the new geometric networks to be able to support those inside and the utility networks to add additional capabilities. And that work is ongoing. That's a great question, and we can find somebody to. We're starting to do kind of the groundwork for it, but it's not in the next release. Yeah. So the question is, the pre-configured, those pre-planned areas, who are they available to be used by? So that can be controlled by the sharing model in ArcGIS Online. So you can share them with multiple users. So what happens is, if you share that package of data with the user, and then you want to be able to synchronize it once you download it, it gets registered as its own set of data for that user. So then they can continue with a bidirectional sync after that. So it's all about creating that first initial package to be able to offload that work from your servers or from ArcGIS Online, and also have a quicker response. So if somebody comes in and wants one of those areas, you only have to wait for the download time, not the whole packaging time. After you get it on the device and register any of the geodatabases that might be in there, then it works just like if you took an on-demand piece of data offline and people can synchronize with it. So it can be used with multiple users. Yeah, so so great question. How big can those base maps be? That's all limited based on that export tile size limit. We have some, I can't remember the number, we do have some things for like our tiling scheme with ArcGIS Online, roughly how big that works out to. I don't remember off the top of my head. With vector tiles, you can grow them very, very large. And it all depends on because it uses a kind of a sparse matrices for the tiles. If you're in a rural area and the data is relatively light, you can take off, in some cases, almost whole states worth of data. If you get into dense cities, then the geographic area shrinks because there's actually more tiles there. So it's a bit more variable with vector tiles, but they can take off a lot more data in a lot smaller size than raster tiles. Correct. The admins, when you create those offline areas, when you create the map areas, the admin can dictate what levels it wants to be packaged at. Yes. So the question is, does the user have access to the number of tiles? It's advertised by the service itself. So it would show up in the REST endpoint, the JSON on the REST endpoint. There's a flag that talks about whether or not it's enabled for export at all, and then it would actually show up there. So anybody who has access to hit the tile service would be able to view that on the REST endpoint. I don't think we expose that particularly well in any of our the portal or online user interfaces. So I think that's the only place you'd go to see it, is the REST endpoint. That's a great question. We can talk about that one after. I'm just going to see if anybody else has any other questions. Any other questions at all about the overall size of how big is the size on disk? So yeah, the question is, how big is that actual the MMPK that you would generate using vector tiles for different size areas, or based on the level of details? So right now with mobile vector tile packages, or vector tiles taking them offline, there's a certain fixed size for all of them. That's a minimum size of around, I think it's 70 meg, because that's all of the different resources, some fonts, some of the different stylings, that kind of stuff. So there's a base size. After that, all of it's your data, and that then starts to scale up. So you're going to see a minimum of around 70 megs, and then from there, after that, the data is actually quite small. So I'll take off, for example, in the city of Portland, Oregon, take off a good chunk of the northern state of Oregon and a bit of Washington, and that'll come out to be a couple hundred megs in size for one of our navigation vector tile base map. And take it offline. We have some estimation tools built onto the REST endpoints. There's some estimate tile sizes that you can actually do some interrogation of those to figure out how big they are. But in general, the vector tiles do not scale the same way as the raster tiles. So with raster tiles, it's a fairly exponential growth. You get 4 more tiles down, and that really bumps up the size of your tile packages. The vector tiles don't scale the same way. Because that data gets reused potentially in multiple levels, depending on how it's symbolized and depending on what you're showing, it scales much better to go from the whole set of level of details than what the raster tiles would. Yeah. Cool. I think with that, we'll stop. I'll definitely be here. I can answer any questions. And of course, you can always come find us at the island and ask any questions from there. So thank you very much.